I'm a great believer in doing a show and tell, what we will build. And this is what we're going to build. It's a WPF application. And what I will do is I will give you a copy of the code in my Git account. I'll link to that in the video description, maybe in this video, maybe in the next video, maybe in both. I don't know which I'm going to do yet. But here's the application, very simple. We have a text box which will reveal a file path when it's selected using this button. That's the zip file that we're going to get from Moodle. We've got a destination location, which is where we want to put the extracted and renamed files. We will do that by selecting a folder explorer, a folder guide, what's it called? Folder browser, something or other, dialog. And then I've got the task prefix. So the task set we're going to work with is called task 4 in the assignment. And so we will give it a prefix, task 04. And then this button, when it's pushed, will rename everything as if by magic. Now what we're going to try and do is we're going to take the file which was downloaded as a zip file from Moodle. There it is there. And I'm just briefly going to explain what it looks like inside, again from the first video. So you can see the naming structure is not very good for me in terms of what I was trying to get. So we will rename those things to make it more appropriate. Remember, what I'm aiming for is task 04, surname, comma, forename. Now, what I'm going to try and do is take it from there and put it into a folder here called task test rename. This is just for development purposes. So let me just work up that and make sure that you can understand what happens. So the application is now running. This little black box here indicates that it's in debug mode. I can turn that off, and I will do it in a future set of videos. So we now select the source. So that takes us to the File Open Explorer, and it's in the Downloads folder. It's that one, Open. So that then gives us the path to that particular file. There it is. Sorry, I couldn't see it there for a minute. And then we select our destination, and this is the folder view file. So file, and it's in D. It's in, forgive my layers of, I can't help it, I put too many layers of test rename. So the file prefix is test 04. And then if I press the rename the files, all the magic should happen. And it's supposed to open Explorer in my newly, used folder, but I haven't got that working yet. I'll work on that and try and fix that. Test rename, and there's the format that I want. Exactly. Let me explain something. This is not a WPF lesson. This is not a WPF instruction set. The code will be there. You can try and interpret it. And if you don't understand how WPF is using layout things in its interfaces, then I suggest you look for some training sort of on that before you even begin this, because it can be confusing at the beginning. But simply what happens is that WPF uses interface design based on containers. And the containers are grids, stack panels, and so forth. And it's written in a language which is called XAML, X-A-M-L, Extensible Application Markup Language. And it looks a lot like HTML. It's a markup language, and therefore the tagging system is very much the same as you might see in HTML, and the style is much the same, where you've got opening and closing tags. But I just want to reiterate, this is not a course in WPF. How I've done this one is that the interface is based on a grid. It comes up with a grid automatically. I've renamed the screen to Moodle File Renamer. And then I've got 4 rows and 6 columns. Now that allows me to be much more careful about how I span controls over different rows and columns. There's no row spanning in this one, but column spanning there is. For example, it allows me to give a proportion to the screen in terms of in sixth I'm working with. Now, in many sort of interface design processes, they work in twelfths. This is sixth. I didn't need 12. So I've got, in the first 4 columns, which are 0 to 3, I've got the label, which is called a text block, and the text box, and so forth for the three pieces of data I need to gather. And then I've got buttons, which you may know are not quite the same size. I didn't need it, they need to be the same size. And then finally in the fourth row, which is row 3, I've got a little clear button, and all that does is it just takes the stuff out of those text boxes if you made a mistake in selecting the wrong source and so forth. Now, let me just go through this perhaps in a little bit more detail to see what you've got. So rows and columns, and in the very first default 00 I've put a stack panel which has got the label for the text block, which is, select the file and then the text box and so forth. But I do not intend to go through that. That is how it is made. What is much more important is that when we get to button controls have events, and these events are going to be dealt with in C# as code behind. Look here, I have on row 98, this clear button is called clear button on click. And how I create that is important that each button has a name. So you give it X, and that's the namespace, :name equals clear button. And then if you go into this one and just click equals and tab, you get an on click event. So that code is going to be dealt with in the C#. And if I go to F12, it will come up with the code behind for that particular button. And what that button does is it calls this method, because I use it again in a different part of the code, so you factor it out and then just call it when you need it. So it's very much similar to what you would do in event-driven programming, and in fact this is an event-driven application. One of the great values of WPF is that it can use data binding, but I didn't need that here. I could have bound the control here to the file path and so forth. Too complicated. This is just an event-driven application. I want to select things and do things with the things that have been selected. So it's very straightforward. So just dealing with the interface in this video, that's how the interface is made up. And you'll see that it is a set of rows and columns which allow me to lay things out really precisely. One of the great values of WPF is that when you do lay things out, if I do it in a different interface size, the controls are much more friendly in the way in which they resize than they would be in a Windows Form application. And that's the way I like to do things now, because I found that it just makes life so much easier by using the XAML, which is based on relative positioning rather than absolute coordinates. So that's what we're going to build.